The difference between a predator and prey is often just a matter of perspective. In the heart of New York City, inside a restaurant shimmering with wealth and power, 5 predators walked in to claim the biggest prize of all billionaire tech mogul Alastair Finch. They were professional ruthless, and they had accounted for everything: his bodyguards, the police response time, every exit. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They overlooked the waitress clearing their table, a woman named Catherine Pierce. They saw a servant, a ghost in an apron. They had no idea they were walking into her cage, not theirs. The air in the gilded cage was thick with the scent of money. Not the crisp, papery smell of new bills, but the intangible aroma of effortless wealth, a blend of expensive perfume, aged leather from $5,000 shoes, and the subtle buttery notes of seared scallops that cost more than a day's wages. For Catherine Pierce, it was the smell of a life she observed but never touched. Her existence here was one of quiet efficiency, a series of precise movements choreographed to the rhythm of clinking glasses and hushed conversations. She was a ghost in a black apron, refilling water-clearing plates and disappearing into the background so seamlessly that the patrons rarely registered her presence. Tonight the restaurant was humming with its usual Tuesday evening crowd. Wall Street brokers celebrated phantom victories, old money couples picked at their food with practiced indifference, and a smattering of surgically enhanced socialites laughed a little too loudly. Kate moved through it all with an economy of motion that bordered on unnerving. Her steps were silent, her hands steady. Her gaze, however, was never still. She saw everything. She saw the tremor in the hand of the young banker at table 7 as he tried to impress his date the way the woman at table 12 subtly slid her wedding ring off. Before her companion arrived the almost imperceptible signal from the maitre d' to the sommelier. These were the tiny, insignificant dramas that played out every night. They were her entertainment, a distraction from the low, constant hum of vigilance that was etched into her very DNA. She had been working at the Gilded Cage for 11 months. 11 months of predictable routine, of low stakes and anonymity. It was the longest she had stayed in one place in over 5 years. Here she was, just Kate, the quiet waitress, who was surprisingly good at remembering complex orders. No one knew the woman she used to be, the woman whose hands were trained for things far more permanent than carrying a tray of champagne flutes. No one suspected that her calm demeanor was a carefully constructed fortress, built to contain a lifetime of violence she was desperate to forget. At precisely 8 o'clock, the delicate balance of the room shifted. It was a subtle change, a tightening in the atmosphere that only someone like Kate would notice. The front door swung open, and Alastair Finch strode in as if he owned the very air the other patrons were breathing. He didn't, of course, but he owned the company that had designed the restaurant's state-of-the-art security system, the AI that managed its stock portfolio, and probably the real estate the building sat on. Finch was a titan of the tech world, the celebrated CEO of Ethereum Dynamics. He was a man who appeared on the cover of Forbes and Wired, with equal frequency lauded as a visionary and reviled as a monopolist. In person, he was exactly as the media portrayed him, tall, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Kate's car, and radiating an aura of impatient genius. His sharp, angular face was set in a permanent scowl of dissatisfaction, as if the entire world was a poorly coded program he was constantly being forced to debug. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were 2 men built like refrigerators, their own expensive suits failing to conceal the hardware they carried beneath. A third man, leaner, and with the alert, predatory eyes of a hawk, moved just ahead of them. This was Robert Henderson Finch's head of security, a man whose reputation in the private security world was almost as formidable as Finch's was in tech. The maitre d', a man named Geoffrey, who could condescend to royalty, practically genuflected as he led Finch's party to the best table in the house. Table 1, a secluded booth in the corner with a panoramic view of the restaurant and a discreetly placed exit to a private alley. It was Kate's section. Of course it was. The usual Geoffrey Finch said not as a request, but as a command. He didn't even look at the man. His attention was already on his Stark pad, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. Of course, Mr. Finch. Catherine will be taking care of you this evening. Kate approached the table, her notepad in hand, the picture of professional deference. Good evening, Mr. Finch. Can I start you with some water? We have Icelandic glacial or a sparkling San Pellegrino. Finch didn't look up. Scotch. Macallan 25. Neat. And tell the chef I want the Wagyu, but it had better be authentic Kobe. The last time it tasted like a cheap knockoff from Idaho. His security detail remained standing, scanning the room with methodical precision. Henderson's eyes swept over Kate, cataloguing her in less than a second female, non-threatening part of the scenery, before moving on. The dismissal was total. It was a feeling Kate was used to, one she actively cultivated. To be underestimated was to be unseen. To be unseen was to be safe. She took the orders from his two companions, a steak for one, a salad for the other, both requesting only water. They were working. Henderson didn't order anything. His job was to watch. As Kate turned to leave, Finch spoke again, his voice sharp with irritation. And you? Waitress. Kate paused, turning back slowly. Yes, sir. He finally lifted his eyes from the screen. They were a piercing, intelligent blue, but utterly devoid of warmth. Don't hover. I require efficiency, not attentiveness. Bring the scotch, take the full order, and then make yourself scarce, unless I summon you. Is that clear? Perfectly, Sir Kate replied, her voice a flat, neutral tone. She met his gaze for a fraction of a second, long enough for him to see her obedience, but not long enough for him to see the flicker of something else deep within her eyes. It was a flicker of memory of another man in another place who spoke with that same arrogant authority right before his world had been torn apart. She retreated to the service station, her movements fluid and unhurried. The encounter left a bitter taste in her mouth. Alistair Finch was the epitome of the powerful men she had once been paid to protect, and sometimes to hunt. Men who believed their wealth and intellect made them gods immune to the grubby realities of the world. They surrounded themselves with walls of money and muscle, never realizing how fragile those walls could be. From the corner of her eye, she watched Henderson direct his men. One took a position near the main entrance, the other maintained a discreet but clear line of sight to Finch from the bar. It was a standard, competent setup. Textbook, even. But Kate knew that textbook strategies were designed for textbook threats, and in her experience, the real threats never ever read the book. She busied herself polishing cutlery, her mind a quiet whirlwind of angles, exits, and vulnerabilities. The restaurant's name, The Gilded Cage, suddenly felt less like a pretentious affectation and more like a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. The scotch arrived, a perfect 2-ounce pour in a heavy crystal tumbler. Kate placed it on the table with a steady hand, her fingers brushing the cool glass, for only a moment. Finch grunted in acknowledgement without looking up from his device. The two bodyguards remained stoic, their eyes constantly roving. Kate retreated, melting back into the orchestrated chaos of the dinner rush. For the next 30 minutes, a fragile sense of normalcy settled over table 1. Finch worked, his security watched, and Kate served the surrounding tables. But the hum of vigilance in the back of her mind was growing louder. It was a sixth sense, honed in the dusty streets of Kabul and the rain-slicked alleys of Eastern Europe. It was the feeling of a pattern being disrupted, a thread being pulled in the tapestry of the ordinary. The thread appeared in the form of 5 men who entered the restaurant, not as a group, but in a staggered, seemingly random sequence over the span of 10 minutes. To anyone else, they were just 5 more wealthy patrons, a pair of businessmen discussing a deal, a man meeting a friend, a solo diner. But Kate saw what others missed. The first 2 men were seated at a table near the center of the room, giving them a clear view of almost every other table, including Finch's. They ordered a bottle of expensive wine, but Kate noticed their glasses remained mostly full. Their conversation seemed animated, but their eyes were cold, detached, constantly sweeping the room in short, disciplined arcs. They weren't looking at each other. They were mapping the environment. The third man took a seat at the bar. He ordered a beer and stared at the sports highlights on the overhead screen, but his reflection in the mirror behind the bar gave him a perfect, unobstructed view of Finch's booth and the bodyguard stationed nearby. He never looked directly at them, but his focus was absolute. The 4th and 5th men entered together and took a table near the kitchen entrance. This was the detail that tightened the knot of dread in Kate's stomach. It was a tactical position. It controlled a primary exit route and a choke point. They were laughing, acting like old friends, catching up, but their posture was wrong. They sat with their backs to the wall, a classic defensive position, and their feet were flat on the floor, ready to move in an instant. There was no relaxation in their bodies, only coiled, waiting tension. Kate felt a cold sweat prickle her neck. This was wrong. This was a professional setup. It was a classic box-in maneuver. Finch was the target. Her training screamed at her. Observe, analyze, act. She tried to dismiss it as paranoia, a ghost of her former life bleeding into her peaceful present. But she couldn't. The details were too precise, too coordinated. The way they all wore similar dark, well-fitted suits that could conceal weapons. The way none of them checked their phones, a near impossibility in this day and age. They were disconnected from the outside world, because their entire world was now contained within these 4 walls. She needed to warn someone. Her eyes flickered towards Henderson Finch's vaunted head of security. He was good, but he was comfortable. He was looking for the obvious threat, the lone gunman, the crazed fan. He wasn't looking for the predators hiding in plain sight, mimicking the behavior of the flock. Making her way towards the bar on the pretense of picking up a drink order, Kate passed close to Henderson. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low and urgent. Henderson's eyes snapped to her, his gaze sharp and annoyed. "What is it? Your client may be in danger," she whispered, keeping her expression neutral, her eyes focused on a point just past his shoulder. "There are 5 men. They came in separately, but are working together. 2 at table 9, 1 at the bar, 2 by the kitchen. They're boxing you in." Henderson's expression didn't change, but a flicker of condescending amusement touched his eyes. He gave the room a cursory glance, his gaze sweeping over the men Kate had indicated. He saw what he wanted to see, rich men in a rich restaurant. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with practiced patience, as if speaking to a child. "I appreciate your concern, but I have been protecting high-value targets for 15 years. I know what a threat looks like. These are just customers. Please go back to your duties and let us handle security." Kate felt a surge of frustration, so hot it almost buckled her knees. "You don't understand. Their positioning is tactical. They aren't eating or drinking. They're waiting. Check the man at the bar. He's watching you in the mirror. The 2 by the kitchen are blocking an exit." Henderson's jaw tightened. "I've got my men on all the exits. The situation is under control. Now I'm not going to tell you again. Back off. You're drawing attention." He turned away from her, a clear dismissal. He had already labeled her as a hysterical waitress, probably starstruck or overly imaginative. The pride of the professional, the inability to accept a warning, from an unqualified source was a fatal flaw she had seen get good men killed. She was on her own. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the placid melody of the restaurant's string quartet. She could walk away. She could go into the kitchen, slip out the back and be gone before the first glass shattered. It wasn't her fight. She had left that life behind. She had promised herself she would never go back. Alistair Finch was an arrogant billionaire who had treated her like dirt. Why should she risk everything for him? Then her eyes fell on the other people in the room. The young couple on their first date. The elderly woman celebrating her birthday with her family. They were all lambs in a slaughterhouse, completely unaware of the wolves that had just locked the doors. Her promise to herself was one thing, but her duty, the deeply ingrained instinct to protect the unsuspecting, was another. It was a part of her she could never truly kill. She moved back to her station, her mind racing, calculating. The layout of the restaurant became a schematic in her head. The distance between tables, the weight of a water pitcher, the length of a steak knife on the butcher block in the kitchen, the boiling water in the pasta station, the fire extinguisher by the main door. Everything became a potential weapon, a tool, a variable in a rapidly escalating equation. From across the room, she saw the man at the bar nod a tiny, almost invisible gesture. It was the signal. The leader of the pair at table 9 subtly touched his earpiece. The hunters were ready. The trap was about to spring, and Kate Pierce, the ghost in the apron, made her choice. She would not run. She would become the thing she had been running from. She took a deep breath, the expensive air of the gilded cage feeling thin and sharp in her lungs, and she began to move, not as a waitress, but as a soldier. The first move was almost silent, a ripple in the calm before the storm. The man at the bar slid off his stool, his hand disappearing inside his jacket. Simultaneously, the two men by the kitchen stood up, their friendly demeanor, vanishing like a mask, dropped to the floor. The shift in energy was instantaneous and absolute. The air crackled with menace. Henderson, for all his arrogance, was not a fool. He saw the coordinated movement, and his training finally kicked in. "Sir, down," he yelled, shoving a stunned Alistair Finch lower into the booth. His hand flew to the weapon under his own jacket. But he was too late. He was reacting, and they were acting. The man from the bar was already on top of the bodyguard stationed near the entrance. There was no gunshot, just a sickening thud. The bodyguard crumpled to the ground, a thin, silver-hilted knife protruding from the side of his neck. It was brutally efficient, a professional's work. Chaos erupted. A woman screamed, a high-pitched shriek that shattered the genteel atmosphere. Diners scrambled, knocking over chairs and tables in a blind panic. The sound of breaking glass and terrified shouts filled the room. The two men from the central table moved on Henderson and the other bodyguard at the bar. They moved with a fluid, terrifying synergy, flanking the security men before they could even draw their weapons properly. The first attacker used a stun gun, a high-voltage charge that made the bodyguard at the bar convulse and drop. The second engaged Henderson, not with a gun, but with a short, extendable baton. Henderson was big and strong, but his attacker was faster, a blur of motion. He parried Henderson's initial punch and struck him hard across the wrist, forcing him to drop his firearm. Another blow to the knee sent the security chief to the floor, gasping in pain. It had taken less than 10 seconds. Finch's entire professional security detail was neutralized. The remaining two men, the ones from the table near the kitchen, now acted as crowd control. They didn't have rifles, but they pulled out sleek black pistols fitted with suppressors. "Nobody move," one of them yelled, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through the panicked screams. "Stay on the floor, hands where we can see them. This does not concern you. We are only here for him." He gestured with his pistol towards Finch's booth. The leader, a tall man with pale, icy eyes and a severe haircut, who had been one of the two at the central table, strode towards the booth. He moved with the confident grace of a wolf closing in on its prey. He ignored the cowering patrons, his focus entirely on the billionaire huddled on the leather seat. Alistair Finch, the man who controlled empires with the tap of a screen, looked small and terrified. His face was ashen, his arrogance stripped away, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a man who had completely lost control. Kate had used the initial burst of chaos to her advantage. While others screamed and dove under tables, she moved with purpose. She didn't run away from the danger. She moved towards its periphery, using the panic as cover. She slid behind the long marble-topped bar, crouching low. The bartender, a young man named Leo, was hiding there, trembling. "Call 911. She whispered, her voice a blade of ice. "Keep the line open. Don't speak. Just put the phone down." Leo fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking too much to dial properly. Kate reached over, took the phone, dialed the 3 digits with practiced speed, hit send, and slid it back into his hands before he could protest. She rose just enough to peer over the bar's edge. The leader, whom she now mentally designated as Nikolai, based on his accent and bearing, was standing over Finch. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice laced with a faint Eastern European accent. "A pleasure to finally meet you in person. You will come with us now. No sudden movements, no heroics, and you will live to see tomorrow's stock market opening." He reached down to grab Finch's arm, and that's when Kate acted. She had no gun, no knife, no weapon of any kind. But the bar was her armory. Her hand closed around the neck of a heavy full bottle of Grey Goose vodka. In one fluid motion, she rose from behind the bar. "Hey!" she shouted. The leader, Nikolai, turned, his eyes narrowing in annoyance at the unexpected interruption. He saw the waitress, the non-entity, standing there. He opened his mouth to issue a dismissive command, perhaps to tell her to get down before she got hurt. He never got the chance. Kate swung the bottle in a vicious arc, not like an amateur, but with her entire body behind it, aiming for the temple. Years of training guided the blow. Nikolai, despite his skill, was caught by surprise. He jerked his head back, but the bottle still connected with a sickening crunch against his jaw and cheekbone. The thick glass shattered, spraying vodka and shards everywhere. He staggered back, roaring in pain and fury, a dark bruise already blooming on his face. The element of surprise was everything, and she had just used all of it. The other 4 men turned their attention to her instantly. The 2 with pistols raised their weapons. The man who had taken down Henderson with the baton started moving towards her, a cruel smile on his face. The 5th man, who had used the stun gun, circled around the other side of the bar. They were closing in. 4 trained operators against 1 waitress. The odds were impossible. But Kate's face was a mask of cold, focused calm. The fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was an old friend. She had learned long ago to harness it, to let it sharpen her senses, to turn it into fuel. The waitress was gone. In her place stood someone else, a spectre from a past filled with blood and shadow. The gilded cage had broken open, but it wasn't Finch who had been freed. It was her, and she was about to show them what a cornered animal could do. The restaurant, which moments before had been a cacophony of screams, fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The patrons, the staff, and Alistair Finch himself watched in utter disbelief as the quiet waitress transformed. The change was terrifying. Her posture shifted, her body settling into a low, balanced fighting stance. Her eyes, once placid and deferential, now burned with a chilling intensity, darting between the 4 men advancing on her, assessing, prioritizing, and executing a combat solution in microseconds. The man with the baton, let's call him Baton Man, reached her first confident and sneering. He swung the steel weapon in a horizontal arc, aimed at her head, a blow that would have crushed a normal person's skull. Kate didn't retreat. She flowed forward under the swing, the baton whistling through the air where her head had been a split second before. Inside his guard, she was a whirlwind of controlled violence. Her left hand shot out and grabbed the wrist of his weapon arm, locking it. Simultaneously, her right elbow drove upward, with brutal force directly under his chin. There was a wet, cracking sound as his teeth snapped together and his head whipped back. His eyes rolled up, and his body went limp. But Kate didn't let go. She twisted his arm using his own momentum to spin him around, positioning his collapsing body between her and the two men with pistols. He was a human shield. Pop! Pop! The suppressed shots were soft coughs in the silent room. Two small holes appeared in the back of Baton Man's expensive suit jacket. He jerked in her grasp and she let him fall to the floor. The momentary shield had given her the second she needed. She vaulted over the bar landing silently on the other side. One of the gunmen, Pistol 1, was already rounding the edge, his weapon tracking her. He was disciplined, moving to flank her. Kate's hand darted out and snatched a cocktail shaker full of ice and a long steel bar spoon. As Pistol 1 came around the corner, she flung the contents of the shaker directly into his face. Ice shards and freezing gin hit his eyes, a shocking, blinding assault. He cried out instinctively, raising a hand to his face, his aim faltering for a crucial instant. In that instant, Kate closed the distance. She drove the pointed end of the long bar spoon deep into the soft tissue of his throat, just above the clavicle. It wasn't a lethal blow, but it was incapacitating. He choked, dropping his pistol, as both hands flew to his neck, a gurgling, strangled sound escaping his lips as he collapsed, writhing. Alistair Finch watched his mind, unable to process what he was seeing. This wasn't a fight. It was a dissection. The woman he had dismissed as a piece of furniture was dispatching trained killers with a terrifying and intimate knowledge of the human body's frailties. Now there were 3 left the second gunman, Pistol 2, the man who had used the stun gun man, and their leader, Nikolai, who was now back on his feet, his face a mask of bloody fury, his jaw clearly dislocated. "Shoot her! Shoot the witch!" Nikolai roared his words, slurred and distorted by his injury. Pistol 2, positioned near the kitchen entrance, had a clear line of sight. He aimed, but the chaos of cowering patrons made for a difficult shot. Kate was already moving, weaving through the overturned tables, making herself a difficult target. She grabbed a heavy linen-draped tablecloth from an empty table and flung it towards him. It was a simple distraction, but effective. As the cloth unfurled in the air, momentarily obscuring his view, she charged. She didn't run at him. She ran towards the kitchen. She burst through the swinging doors just as he fired the bullet, splintering the wood where she had been. Inside the kitchen, it was a different world. The air was hot and filled with the smell of garlic and steel. The kitchen staff were huddled in a corner, their faces pale with terror. "Stay down," Kate commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that left no room for argument. Her eyes scanned the room, her brain processing it as a battlefield. A rack of knives, a vat of boiling water, heavy cast-iron pans, canisters of compressed CO2 for the soda fountains. Stun gun man and Pistol, 2 burst in after her, fanning out to trap her. They thought they had her cornered. They were wrong. She was in her element. Kate ripped a heavy iron skillet from its hook. As Stun Gun Man lunged at her, she met his charge with a full-force swing. The pan connected with the side of his head with a resonant clang that echoed through the kitchen. He dropped like a stone unconscious before he hit the grease-slicked floor. Pistol 2 hesitated, unnerved by the brutal, swift dispatch of his comrades. That hesitation was his last mistake. Kate grabbed a large stockpot of boiling pasta water from the stove. With a grunt of effort, she heaved it, sending a tidal wave of scalding water and cooked penne towards him. He screamed a horrible, agonized sound as the boiling water hit his face, chest, and gun hand. He dropped his pistol, stumbling back, clawing at his blistering skin. Kate moved past him without a second glance, grabbing the fallen pistol from the floor. She checked the magazine and chamber in a single practiced motion. She was armed. She stepped back out into the dining room, the pistol held low and ready in a perfect two-handed grip. The room was still. The only one left standing was Nikolai. He was holding a shard of the broken vodka bottle, the jagged edge pointed towards Alistair Finch, whom he had dragged from the booth and was now holding as a shield. "Drop the gun or he dies." Nikolai snarled, pressing the glass against Finch's throat. A thin line of blood welled up on the billionaire's skin. Finch was shaking his eyes wide with terror fixed on Kate. Kate's expression was unreadable. She raised the pistol sighting down the barrel, her stance perfectly stable. "You won't shoot." Nikolai gambled a crazed look in his eyes. "You shoot me, I slice his throat. You lose. You made 3 mistakes." Kate said, her voice steady and calm, cutting through the tension. "First, you assumed your target's security was the only threat in the room." She took a small step to her left, changing the angle slightly. "Second, you underestimated the waitress." She took another small step. Nikolai's eyes widened slightly as he realized what she was doing. She wasn't just aiming at him. She was creating a specific firing solution. And third, she finished her voice, dropping to a whisper. "You assumed I cared if he lives." In the split second that Nikolai's brain was processing that horrifying statement, she fired. Not at his head. Not at his chest. The bullet struck him in the right shoulder, the one holding the glass shard. The impact shattered the bone. His arm went dead, the shard falling harmlessly to the floor. His entire body convulsed from the shock and pain. Before he could even fall, she was moving forward. She didn't fire again. She closed the distance, reversed the pistol in her hand, and struck him on his already broken jaw with the heavy butt of the weapon. He collapsed into a heap on the floor, unconscious. Silence. The only sounds were the soft weeping of a patron and the distant approaching wail of sirens. Kate stood over the last attacker, the pistol still held at the ready, her chest rising and falling in controlled breaths. She was no longer a waitress. She was a weapon slick and efficient and terrifying. She glanced at Alistair Finch, who was slumped against the wall, staring at her with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and profound fear. His gilded cage had been shattered, and his savior was the most dangerous person he had ever met. The wail of sirens grew from a distant cry to an overwhelming roar, culminating in a chaotic flood of blue and red light washing through the restaurant's panoramic windows. Uniformed NYPD officers and paramedics swarmed the scene, their faces grim, as they took in the tableau of subdued opulence and sudden brutal violence. The patrons were herded out wrapped in shock blankets, their hushed, frantic whispers painting a picture of impossible events. Kate didn't move. She stood in the center of the room, the captured pistol held safely pointed at the floor, her finger off the trigger. Her combat adrenaline was beginning to recede, leaving behind a familiar, chilling emptiness. Her senses were still on high alert. She catalogued the entering officers, their movements, their equipment, their lines of fire. It was an automatic process, a switch she couldn't turn off. A grizzled, weary-looking man in a rumpled suit who was clearly in charge approached her. His name tag read Detective Morrison. His eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He took in the 5 downed men, the specific and brutal nature of their injuries, and finally Kate herself. He saw the pistol in her hand, her professional stance, and the unnerving calm in her eyes. "NYPD," he said, his voice a low gravel. "I need you to place the weapon on the floor." Slowly, Kate complied without a word, smoothly crouching down to set the pistol on the polished wood before standing back up her hands, visible and open. Morrison's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than was professional. It was a look of faint, troubled recognition, as if he were trying to place a face from a file he'd read a long time ago. "You the one who did all this?" "They were a threat to the civilians," Kate stated simply. It was an explanation, not an excuse. Before Morrison could press further, Alistair Finch, having been quickly checked over by a paramedic, stumbled forward. His Tom Ford suit was ruined, stained with his own blood and a splash of Nikolai's. His face was pale, his hands still trembled, but his eyes were locked on Kate with a burning intensity. "She saved us," Finch said, his voice hoarse. "She saved everyone. They were going to kill me." "She took them all down, all 5 of them." Morrison raised an eyebrow, looking from the diminutive waitress to the 5 unconscious or writhing professional operators. The story seemed ludicrous, but the evidence was scattered all around them. "We'll need your statement," Miss Morrison said to Kate. "And yours, Mr. Finch." "She doesn't need to give you a statement," Finch declared, a flicker of his old command returning, but this time it was directed in her defense. "She needs a medal. Whatever she needs, whatever she wants, it's hers. I'll have my legal team handle this." Kate finally spoke, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I don't have a legal team. I'll give a statement." She looked at Finch, her eyes cold. "I don't want anything from you." The finality in her tone struck Finch harder than any of the violence he had just witnessed. He, a man to whom everyone in the world wanted something, was being summarily dismissed by the woman who had just single-handedly saved his life. It was a concept so foreign his brain struggled to compute it. "But I owe you," he stammered. "My life. I owe you my life." "The debt is paid," Kate replied, turning her attention back to Detective Morrison. "They attacked. I defended. End of story." She spent the next 2 hours in a quiet corner of the restaurant, giving a carefully curated statement to Morrison. She was Catherine Pierce, a waitress. The men attacked the restaurant. In the chaos, she got lucky. She used what was available. She omitted every detail that spoke of her training, every piece of jargon, every hint that she had done this before. She painted a picture of a terrified woman acting on pure adrenaline, a series of lucky shots and desperate swings. Morrison listened patiently, his pen scratching against his notepad, but his eyes told a different story. He wasn't buying it. Not completely. A skillet, a tablecloth, a bar spoon and a pot of boiling water, he recited, looking up at her. "You took out 4 trained men with kitchen supplies. And the last one, the leader, you put a bullet in his deltoid from 20 feet away while he was holding a hostage. That's not adrenaline, Miss Pierce. That's a skill set." It was a chaotic situation. Kate maintained her expression unreadable. Right, Morrison grunted, unconvinced. "I've seen chaotic situations. They usually end with a lot more dead civilians when the other side has guns. There's something about you. It's like I've seen your file. Or maybe a file that was supposed to have your name on it, but was just a black rectangle of redacted ink." Kate's blood ran cold. But she didn't let it show. "I'm just a waitress detective. I have a social security number and I pay my taxes. There's nothing else to know." Morrison sighed, closing his notepad. "For now, maybe. You're free to go, Miss Pierce. But don't leave town. We'll have more questions." As Kate walked towards the exit, Geoffrey the maitre d' stopped her. His face, normally a mask of polite snobbery, was filled with genuine awe. "Catherine. That was... I don't know what that was, but thank you." He pressed a thick envelope of cash into her hand. "This is your pay." And this, he added, another even thicker envelope, is from the restaurant's owners. They said to tell you. Well, thank you doesn't seem to cover it. Kate looked at the money, a small fortune that could solve so many of her problems. She pushed the second envelope back into his hand. I'll take my pay. The rest isn't necessary." She walked out into the cool night air, leaving behind the shattered crystal and the baffled police officers. She ignored the news vans that were beginning to arrive. She just wanted to disappear. Across the street, sitting in the back of a blacked-out Escalade, Alistair Finch watched her walk away. He was on the phone with his new head of security, a man being flown in from London. "I don't care what it takes," Finch said, his voice low and intense. "I want to know who she is. Not who she says she is. Who she really is. Use every resource. Ethereum's facial recognition, data mining, government, contacts, everything. I want to know where she came from, who trained her, and why a woman like that is serving overpriced scotch in a restaurant. Find her, and put a surveillance team on her discreetly. She saved my life, and I have a feeling she's now in more danger than ever before." He hung up the phone, his eyes still following her receding figure as she disappeared into the New York City crowd. The debt he knew was far from paid. An act of such profound, shocking violence would not go unanswered. The men she had taken down were not common criminals. They were soldiers in a silent war, and Catherine Pierce had just painted a massive target on her own back. And Alistair Finch, for reasons he didn't yet fully understand, gratitude, fascination, or a terrifying sense of responsibility, felt compelled to stand between her and the storm that was coming. The first thing Kate did was disappear. It was a process she knew as well as breathing. Within 12 hours of the incident at the Gilded Cage, Catherine Pierce ceased to exist in any practical sense. She cleared out her small Spartan apartment, leaving nothing behind but an empty key rack. She wiped her laptop and phone with a data destruction program that would make a government intelligence agency weep. She closed her bank account, taking the cash. She was a ghost again, a phantom drifting through the city's anonymous arteries of subways and bus lines. She found a room for rent in a run-down part of Queens, paid 3 months in cash to a landlord who didn't ask for ID and adopted a new, quieter routine. She bought clothes from thrift stores, kept her head down, and spoke to no one. The quiet life she had so carefully constructed had been obliterated, and now she was back in the shadows waiting. She knew they would come looking for her. Not the police, but the people who had hired those 5 men. Organizations like that didn't tolerate loose ends, and a waitress who could dismantle a professional wetwork team was the loosest end imaginable. Meanwhile, Alistair Finch was unleashing the full, terrifying power of his technological empire. The search for Catherine Pierce became the top priority for Ethereum Dynamics' most elite data analysis team. They were the best in the world digital wizards who could find a single grain of sand on a global beach. But Kate was no grain of sand. She was a ghost in the machine. For 3 weeks, they found nothing. Her social security number was real, but led to a shallow, recently created history. Her employment record before the Gilded Cage was a patchwork of dead ends, cash-in-hand jobs at diners and bars that had since closed down. There were no college records, no driver's license photos beyond the most recent one, no social media presence, no credit history to speak of. It was the digital footprint of someone who had been deliberately and expertly erased. It's impossible, Finch's new head of security, a stern ex-MI6 officer named Peterson, reported. It's not just that there's no information, it's that the absence of information is itself a construct. The voids have been carefully sculpted. This is professional-grade identity sanitization, government level. Finch grew more obsessed with each passing day. He rewatched the security footage from the restaurant, which his team had acquired from the NYPD evidence locker 100 times. He studied her movements, the cold efficiency, the lack of hesitation. This was not a civilian. This was a highly trained operator. Who was she? Finally, they got a break. A junior analyst using an experimental image-aging algorithm ran Kate's face from the security footage against a vast dark web database of leaked government files. The program churned for 72 hours straight, cross-referencing with Interpol watch lists, CIA field reports, and Mossad personnel logs. It found a single tentative match. It was a heavily redacted U.S. Army Special Operations file from 7 years ago. The name on the file was different, but the photo was of a younger, harder-looking Catherine Pierce. She was in desert camouflage, her face smudged with dirt, but the eyes were the same, cold, intelligent, and lethal. Most of the file was just blacked-out blocks of text, but a few words remained visible. Unit, Ghost, Disavowed, Operation Nightingale, Terminated. Ghost isn't a unit name, Peterson explained, his voice grim as he briefed Finch. It's a designation, a solo operator used for missions the government needs to deny ever happened. They're trained in everything infiltration black ops wet work. They're practically urban legends. Operation Nightingale. I've heard whispers. A catastrophic mission in Syria. An entire team wiped out. Official story was a friendly fire incident. The whispers said it was a betrayal. The puzzle was beginning to form a dark, unsettling picture. Kate wasn't just ex-military. She was a disavowed Black Ops soldier, a woman the government itself had tried to erase. She was hiding not just from an enemy, but from her own past. At the same time, Finch's corporate intelligence division was working around the clock to identify the attackers. The captured men were professionals, their identities as carefully scrubbed as Kate's. But Finch had resources beyond law enforcement. He leveraged his company's contracts with the Department of Defense to get access to foreign intelligence. He learned the men were mercenaries, previously tied to a shadowy private military corporation, Argus International. Argus was Ethereum's biggest and most ruthless competitor. While Ethereum built its reputation on groundbreaking, public-facing AI, Argus operated in the darker corners of the market, selling military-grade cyber warfare tools, drone technology, and espionage services to the highest bidder, regardless of their government or ideology. It was a corporate abduction, not an assassination. Peterson concluded, laying out the final piece of the puzzle for Finch. Our intel suggests Argus has been trying to get their hands on Project Chimera. They didn't want to kill you, Mr. Finch. They wanted what's inside you. Finch instinctively touched a small, almost invisible scar behind his ear. Project Chimera was his life's work, the ultimate secret. It wasn't just software. It was a bio-integrated data key, a subdermal implant that contained the source code and encryption keys to Ethereum's next-generation AI, an AI so advanced it could potentially destabilize the global balance of power. The attack wasn't about a ransom. It was about the future of technology and warfare. The implications hit Finch like a physical blow. By saving him, Kate hadn't just stopped a kidnapping. She had prevented the theft of one of the most powerful technological weapons on the planet. And in doing so, she had revealed herself to an enemy that was more powerful and relentless than she could possibly imagine. Argus International would not just see her as a loose end. They would see her as an enemy operator, a threat that needed to be neutralized with extreme prejudice. His surveillance team, after weeks of painstaking work, finally got a hit. A facial recognition camera on a city bus in Queens tagged a woman matching Kate's profile. They tracked her to a dilapidated apartment building. Finch knew he had to warn her. This was no longer just about a debt of gratitude. He had dragged her back into the world she had fought so hard to escape. Her past was catching up with her, but it was his present that was going to get her killed. He got in his car, Peterson in the driver's seat. There was no security detail this time. This was a conversation he needed to have alone. The building in Queens smelled of damp concrete and boiled cabbage. It was a world away from the perfumed air of the gilded cage. Alistair Finch, dressed down in jeans and a simple jacket, felt more out of place here than he had ever felt in a foreign boardroom. Peterson waited in the car, a discreet presence at the end of the block. Finch found her apartment number 4B at the end of a dimly lit hallway. The door was old, the paint peeling. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the wood. What could he possibly say to her? "Thank you for saving my life. And by the way, I've brought a corporate war to your doorstep." He knocked. The sound was flat and dead in the narrow hall. For a long moment, there was only silence. He was about to knock again when he heard a faint click, the sound of a deadbolt being disengaged. The door opened a few inches, held by a chain. One of Kate's eyes appeared in the gap, regarding him with cold suspicion. She looked different. Her hair was cut shorter, dyed a mousy brown. She wore no makeup, and her clothes were plain, designed to make her blend in to be forgotten. But her eyes were the same, sharp, analytical, and wary. "What do you want, Finch?" Her voice was a low rasp. "I need to talk to you," he said, his own voice sounding strained. "It's important. It's about the men who attacked me. Who attacked us." She was silent for a few seconds, her eyes scanning the hallway behind him. He knew she was checking for threats, for backup, for any sign of a trap. Finally, she seemed to decide he was alone. The chain slid free, and the door opened. "You have 5 minutes," she said, stepping aside to let him in. The apartment was even more Spartan than he had imagined. A single mattress on the floor, a folding chair, a small table with a laptop and a duffel bag in the corner that looked like it was packed and ready to go. This wasn't a home. It was a temporary safe house. They weren't random thugs. Finch began getting straight to the point. They were mercenaries working for a corporation called Argus International, my main competitor. Kate's expression didn't change, but he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. I figured it was something like that. Too professional for a simple kidnapping. They weren't trying to kidnap me for ransom. Finch continued, his voice dropping. They were after something I have, a piece of technology. By stopping them, you didn't just save me. You interfered in a major corporate espionage operation. Argus doesn't tolerate interference. He watched her, trying to gauge her reaction. She was perfectly still, her face, a blank canvas. "They know who you are, Catherine," he said, using her full name for the first time. It felt strangely intimate. Or rather, they know who you were. My people dug into your past. U.S. Army Special Operations, Unit Ghost, Operation Nightingale. At the mention of Nightingale, her mask finally cracked. A wave of pain so intense and raw it was almost a physical thing flashed across her face before being suppressed. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she whispered, her voice dangerously tight. "I know that you're a ghost, and you've been running for a long time." Finch pressed on his own voice, filled with a desperate urgency. "But Argus has resources you can't imagine. They will hunt you. They won't stop until they neutralize the threat you represent. You've made yourself their new target." "And what do you propose I do?" She shot back, a bitter, sarcastic edge to her words. "Call the police. Tell them the big bad corporation is after me. The same people who helped you find me. I assume your government contacts." She had him there. He had used the very systems she was hiding from to track her down. "I want to help you," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "I have resources. Security safe houses all over the world, extraction teams. I can protect you. I owe you that." Kate let out a short, harsh laugh. "Protect me? You're the reason I'm in this mess. Your world, your fight, your technology. I was fine. I was invisible. You, Alistair Finch, are a walking disaster. You're a beacon that draws monsters, and I was just a waitress who got caught in your light. Her words stung sharp and true. He had no defense against them. He had brought this to her. I know, he said quietly. But the monsters are here now. We can either face them separately, or we can face them together. She stared at him, her jaw set her eyes, filled with a turbulent mixture of anger and resignation. She had run for 7 years, and it had all been for nothing. One single moment of action, one decision to not let innocent people get hurt, had unraveled it all. As she stood there, locked in a silent battle with her own fate, a tiny dot of red light appeared on the wall just behind her head. Finch's eyes widened in horror. His mind, trained to process data at lightning speed, recognized it instantly. A laser sight. A sniper. He didn't think. He reacted. "Get down!" He roared, lunging forward, shoving her with all his strength. Kate, caught off guard by his sudden movement, stumbled backward. The red dot, which had been moving from the wall towards her chest, was momentarily on him. The window across the small room exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. The sound of the sniper rifle, a deafening crack, was simultaneous. Time seemed to slow down. Finch felt a searing, white-hot pain rip through his shoulder, as the bullet meant for Kate's heart tore through him instead. The force of the impact spun him around, and he crashed to the floor beside her. The last thing he saw before the darkness at the edge of his vision closed in was Kate's face. The waitress was gone. The fear and anger were gone. In their place was the ghost of Operation Nightingale. Her eyes were chips of ice, her expression one of absolute lethal fury. She was already moving, grabbing her duffel bag with one hand, and his arm with the other, dragging him away from the exposed window, back into the world of shadow and violence he had dragged her from. The hunt was on. The bullet that saves a life can also sign a death warrant. Catherine Pierce. The ghost from a forgotten war is now firmly in the crosshairs of an enemy that never forgets. Her quiet life is shattered, and her fate is now chained to the very man she saved. What happens when the world's most dangerous people hunt a woman who is even more dangerous than they are? That's a story for another time. If you are on the edge of your seat and need to know what happens next, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter in this incredible saga. Share this video with someone who loves a story where the hero is the person you least expect.